Thank you very much, Carlo. I really appreciate the invitation to come. I must say, walking over, my fantasy was at 8:30 in the morning there would be a hall with Carlo and Bryan and myself. So thanks to all of you for getting up so early in the morning. And now my computer is just rebelling here. Just give me a second here. We'll see what. There we go. I'm really excited in looking over the agenda at the papers that are going to be presented today. It's, I think, going to be an important day for all of us. And I'd like to just start off in a very general way. When we talk about the university, the sort of image is a place like this. This is a college in Oxford. And we all have those images of what a university should be. And in that general image, the role of the university is classically to advance knowledge, to preserve and disseminate knowledge, to educate students, and that's made possible by academic freedom in teaching, in research and scholarship, and the right to publish. Intramural academic freedom means that you have a right to be critical of the institution where you work without suffering any penalty for that. And extramural academic freedom means you have the right to exercise your rights as a citizen without your employer taking action against you for doing so. It's also, theoretically at least, made possible by collegial governance, where academic decisions are to be made by the academic staff. And in places like Oxford in the idealized version, there is no board of governors. The final decision-making authority is something called the congregation, which is the body of faculty combined, which is the final decision-making authority in all matters in the university. And Cambridge has the equivalent. Now, this rhetoric is, this view is sometimes put into rhetoric. So the University of Toronto has the following statement about the purpose of the university: of fostering an academic community in which learning and scholarship of every member may flourish, with vigilant protection for human rights and a resolute commitment to the principles of equal opportunity, equity, and justice. And within the university context, the most crucial of all human rights is the freedom of speech, academic freedom, and the freedom of research. And these are meaningless unless they entail the right to raise deeply disturbing questions and provocative challenges, the cherished beliefs of society at large and to the university itself. It's this human right to radical, critical teaching and research with which the university has a duty above all else to be concerned. For there is no one else, no other institution, no other office in modern liberal democracy which is the custodian of this most precious and vulnerable right of the liberated human spirit. A wonderful statement. I would have been proud to have written it. There's just a little disparity with reality. You know, we have in Canada today and in many other countries HR policies that theoretically were based on Oxford and that model, but in fact are more representative of Walmart. Our students are increasingly termed to be customers. University presidents, many of them call themselves CEOs. I'm happy to say that, as far as I know, Sheldon Levy is an exception to that. I was looking all over for a picture of Canadian university presidents to put with this. So this photograph, the only place I could find a picture of a collection of Canadian university presidents anywhere on the internet was when they collectively went to Brazil or India in search of international students, which tells you something about priorities. Or where governments increasingly are looking to fund universities based on simplistic quantitative measures that they call key performance indicators. And many of the bad ideas about what universities should do are coming out of the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development, one of whose projects is this one, HELO. This is the assessment of higher education learning outcomes. So giving standardized tests to university students worldwide so you can compare the quality of educational systems based on the outcome of these standardized tests. It's a challenge, as you might imagine, developing standardized tests. But HELO is trying to play on what the OECD did for K-12 where they have a PISA, a standardized test for, I think, for 15-year-olds, and now they're trying to have it for us. Well, there's been no shortage of books on these various things. This is a sample of them. My computer really is rebelling here. There's no shortage of commentary on this, on books. None of this is new to us. You know, back in 1918, Thorsten Veblen commented that what is here said of the businesslike spirit of the latter-day educators is not to be taken as reflecting disparagingly on them or their endeavors. They respond to the call of the times as best they can, to substitute the pursuit of gain and expenditure in place of the pursuit of knowledge as the focus of interest and the objective end in modern intellectual life. That was 1918. You know, the fact is, universities have always been reflective of the societies in which they operate, and the kind of commercialization, market-oriented neoliberal society that we have had its roots much earlier. Clyde Barrow, in looking at American universities from 1894 to 1928, talked about the imperatives of the corporate ideal and what the implications of that, what the implications of those are for universities, as well as talking about what radical scholars must do. And it's not merely that intellectuals play a significant role in the reproduction of capitalism in the capitalist state, but that education has been and remains every bit as much a contested terrain as the shop floor, the party caucus, and the halls of the assembly. We'll come back to that about our role of dealing with the contradictions in the university and what opportunities that affords us. Bill Reddings, in his well-known book on the university in ruins, takes a particularly pessimistic view. The modern university is a ruined institution. Those ruins must not be the object of romantic nostalgia for a lost wholeness, but the site of an attempt to transvalue the fact that the university no longer inhabits a continuous history of progress. Like the inhabitants of some Italian city, we can seek neither to rebuild the Renaissance city nor to destroy its remnants and install rationally planned tower blocks. We can only seek to put its angularities and winding passages to new uses, learning from and enjoying the cognitive dissonances that enclosed piazzas and non-signifying campanili induce. Or more recently, Howard Woodhouse, who teaches at the University of Saskatchewan, who observed that government underfunding continues to accompany growing corporatization. The pincer movement ensures that universities move ever faster to subordinate the pursuit of knowledge to the overriding market principle of monetary gain for stockholders. Universities compliant with the principles place at risk not only the freedom that makes the pursuit of knowledge possible, but also the very process of understanding itself. Those of us who advance this must reaffirm the distinguishing features of the vocation of higher education that make possible the independent critical search for knowledge, academic freedom, and university autonomy. Well, I want to give you two examples before going into what we can do about this. One is university collaborations. These are examples that really reveal the priorities in most contemporary universities. Collaborations with industry are actively encouraged by governments and are increasingly embraced by university administrations. There was a wonderful study done in the United States by the Center for American Progress. It was published in 2010 called Big Oil Goes to College. And it looked at 10 major collaborations, research collaborations between prominent American universities and major petroleum companies. And this is the list of the 10. The total value of these is over $750 million. The largest being the collaboration between the University of California at Berkeley and British Petroleum, worth $500 million over 10 years. And under these collaborations, the university researchers work together, or the university works together with the corporation. There's this big pot of money, research is undertaken by university academics. And what the Center for American Progress did is to look to ensure that universities protected their own integrity in the agreement setting up these collaborations, to ensure that they built in academic freedom, that the research money was allocated through peer review and so forth. And the first thing they ran into was that almost none of these collaboration agreements was a public document. So they spent 2 or 3 years fighting through access to information to get copies of the agreements that public universities had and other universities had entered into, which were secret from the faculty and secret from the university community. And what they found was quite disturbing. In 9 of the 10 agreements, the university failed to maintain majority academic control over the body that governed the collaboration. 4 of the 10, the university ceded complete control to the industry sponsors. This is control over the academic aspects of the collaboration. 8 of the 10 agreements permit the corporate sponsor or sponsors to fully control both the evaluation and selection of faculty research proposals in each new grant cycle. None of the 10 agreements requires faculty research proposals to be evaluated and awarded by peer review. None. 8 of the 10 agreements fail to specify transparently in advance how faculty may apply for funding and what the specific evaluation and selection criteria will be. 9 of the 10 agreements call for no specific management of financial conflicts of interest related to the agreement. None of these agreements, for example, specifies that committee members charged with evaluating and selecting faculty research proposals must be impartial and may not award corporate funding to themselves. 9 of the 10 agreements do affirm the university's, the academics' right to publish. In the United States, the National Institutes of Health recommends that the longest that any publication can be delayed is 60 days, and that's the time needed to apply for a patent. None of these agreements capped the amount that publication delays can be held to less than 60 days. In other words, in every case where there was a right to publish, there was the ability of the corporate sponsor to delay publication. Well, we got curious at CAT as to what the picture would look like in Canada. And so just published in November a book called Open for Business, on what terms. We identified about 12 university, industry, government collaborations. There were a lot of things that looked like collaborations that weren't, where INCO gave a lot of money. There's an INCO Center at Memorial, but it's just naming a building. So we weren't looking at building namings. We weren't looking at deals with individual faculty. We were looking at whether or not, we were looking at genuine collaborations of one or two sorts. Either a research collaboration, like the American ones, where the industry put up a bunch of money, often in our case, in Canada, matched by government. Government played a much more active role in Canada than in the United States in helping fund these, and where the university put up money as well for an ongoing research project. The other type of collaborations are program collaborations, where an industrial partner or donor will come to the university and propose a new program. The university will embrace it, and then a joint funder-university committee will be struck for this ongoing program. So there were 20 of these. We were inspired in 2010. The publication didn't come out till November 2013 because in almost all cases, these deals were all secret. And we had to battle universities and industry and governments to get access to the agreements, and had to aggressively pursue access through access to information legislation. And there's still 8 that we haven't been able to get. So the report came out focusing on the 12 we were able to get, and this is a list of the research collaborations, which vary from a huge one on aerospace research in Quebec that involves 14 universities, including some Ontario universities, and 52 aerospace companies, from very large ones like Pratt & Whitney to some somewhat smaller ones. My favorite is the Center for Oil Sands Innovation, which is a partnership between Imperial Oil, the Alberta government, and the University of Alberta. I guess it's my favorite because of its acronym, which is COSY. In terms of program collaborations, there were 5 that we found. A partnership, but doesn't have a name, but just a partnership between the University of Ontario Institute of Technology, Durham College, and Ontario Power Generation, which is the old Ontario Hydro, or part of it. The last one, University of Western Ontario, a major law firm in Canada approached the University of Western Ontario proposing to create a new program in mining law, proposing that the university create a new program in mining law in which the law firm would be a partner. So we looked at how do these 12 collaborations measure up. In terms of transparency, the terms of 10 of them were secret. Only two of those agreements were publicly available. Was academic freedom specifically protected in these agreements? 7 of the 12 had no protection for academic freedom. Did the university maintain complete control over all academic matters? An absolute requisite in our view. 6 had no provision for assuring the university retained control. What about disclosure of conflict of interest? If you're a researcher doing research in partnership with Imperial Oil, or do you have to declare a partnership? Only 1 of the 12 required a declaration of institutional or individual conflicts of interest. What about a stronger position that you can have no financial interest in collaborating with partners? A demand that we're seeing increasingly in medical schools, given the pressure of the pharmaceutical industry. So the really ethical research in medical school are demanding that you can't undertake research if you have any financial interest in the company whose drug you're doing trials on. In this case, only 1 of the 12 prohibited financial conflicts of interest. What about the right to publish? 5 protected faculty members' right to publish, 5 did not, and for 2 of them, we couldn't, it just was unclear. To what extent did the agreements protect the recruitment and evaluation of postdocs and faculty members from being affected by their decision not to be involved in the project? This was a big issue in the deal between Berkeley and British Petroleum, because you imagine $500 million coming into your department or faculty, the distorting effect that could have. So what happens to people who say, we don't want to participate? Is there any provision to ensure that they're not negatively affected? So we looked at that. Half of them had such protection, half of them did not. What about for regular publicly available assessments of the effects and effectiveness of each agreement? And what is this going to mean? Does the academic community have any sense of what's going on? No agreement had a provision for that. What about independent post-agreement evaluation plan? Only 1 of the 12 had any evaluation after the fact. If we look at the research collaborations only, our funding decisions based on peer review. Only 1 of the 7 was money allocated by peer review. What about clear details on how faculty can apply for funding and what the evaluation and selection criteria? I mean, it's just such an obvious thing. Only 3 of them specified that. What about researchers being assured access to all the data they collected? This is a big issue in a lot of corporate partner research where the corporation collects the data. This is especially an issue in clinical trials and drug research. The corporation collects the data and then makes it available to the researchers. And one of the things we fight for in those cases is to make sure that researchers have access to all the data collected. Only 3 of the collaborations specified that. I'll give you another example of the problems. This has to do with university governance. The theory is we have collegial governance in Canada. It goes back to the Fanelli Commission in 1906, which is the commission an Ontario Royal Commission looking at governance at the University of Toronto. And it came to the conclusion in 1906 that there should be boards of governors to deal with financial and administrative matters, but there had to be a senior academic body that dealt and had the authority over all academic matters. That the university was a different kind of workplace. They wouldn't have called it that way, they wouldn't have seen it that way, but it was a version of worker self-governance. And so we have senates as a result of that, and every university created since 2000, every university created since 2000 and, since 1906, has had a bicameral system with a Senate, or in Saskatchewan and Alberta they go by a different general faculty council, but essentially the same thing. Now, Thorsten Veblen, back in 1918, looking at the system of collegial governance that existed in the United States and Canada, thought rather disparagingly of it. Faculty of a well-administrated university are organized into the, quote, many committees for the shifting of sawdust. These committees being in effect, if not intention, designed chiefly to keep the faculty talking while the bureaucratic machine goes on its way, under the guidance of the executive and his personal counselors and lieutenants. That was 1918. Now in 1966, or actually in the early 1960s, there was so much concern and criticism about the failure of senates to be an effective voice for faculty, the CAUT and the forerunner of the Association of Universities and Colleges of Canada, the organization of the university presidents, undertook a joint study. They retained 2 eminent academics who toured the country for 3 years, meeting with senates, evaluating what was going on. One was a guy named James Duff from the UK, and another was Robert Birdall from the United States. And they published a report in 1996 called University Government in Canada. And they talked about what they heard, the charges that one so often hears today. Now, this could have been written today. That universities are becoming so large, so complex, and so dependent on public funds that scholars no longer form or even influence their own policy. That a new and rapidly growing class of administrators is assuming control, and that the gulf of misunderstanding and misapprehension is widening between the academic staff and the administrative personnel, with grave damage to the functioning of both. And they proposed a whole bunch of changes. They said, you know, the model of collegiate governance is actually a wonderful model. It just needs to be tweaked. You know, presidents shouldn't chair senates. They have a whole bunch of recommendations, which were adopted by virtually every university in the country to fix the problem. 30 years later, it didn't seem to be fixed. So CAT set up an independent study group on university governance with the attractive acronym of ISGUG. And we got 3 prominent academics to tour the country for several years looking at what was happening in university governance and the role of senates. And they observed that it was consistently suggested during our hearings that control of the university had fallen into the hands of an administrative group of senior officials, the president, vice presidents, and the deans, and that this group, in fact, ran the university without any genuine accountability. So 1918, 1966, 1993, I mean, at some point we're going to realize that collegial governance, ideally a form of worker self-governance, is a wonderful vision, but largely doesn't work. And so one of the things that always puzzled me is why we remain so committed to it. And then I remembered my first-year psychology course when I learned about Pavlov and about inconsistent reinforcement and how you build commitment through inconsistent reinforcement. So in senates, we win 1 time out of 10 or 1 time out of 12, and it's unpredictable when that's going to be. And it's sometimes related to our ability to mobilize, and often our ability to mobilize isn't effective, but we win occasionally, so that builds a commitment. This thing can really work. It just doesn't. Well, it hasn't for over 100 years. So that's another aspect of the contemporary university where the ideal and the real are very different. So what can academic staff do and students do in a situation where we're in universities where virtually everything is for sale? In my job, I travel to most universities. There are many where every single classroom is named after a corporation. Go to Osgoode Hall, every classroom is named after a law firm. You know, it seems like most universities actually have a menu of what you can buy with various amounts of money. So if you have X amount of dollars, you can get a classroom named after you. If you have Y amount of dollars, you can get a building named after you. If you have even more money, you can get a faculty named after you. So what, you know, it really is interesting. So what are our options? Well, there's the classic option, which many of our colleagues choose, and that's just put our heads in the sand. There's a second option, which others of our colleagues embrace. And then there's the third option of actually speaking out and doing something and mobilizing. And there are some prominent academics who have spoken out. I mean, many in this room. John Polanyi, Canada's Nobel laureate, only living Canadian Nobel laureate, in commenting on collaborations observed 10 years ago. At a certain point, we don't have universities anymore, but outlying branches of industry. Then all the things that industry turns to universities for, breadth of knowledge, far time horizons, independent voice, are lost. Well, more specifically, you know, we can use collective bargaining creatively to ensure academic freedom and collegial governance. The vision in that classic university of a place where there's academic freedom and worker self-governance is a wonderful vision that we should not give up, even if we're giving up an institution that reflects many of the worst aspects of society. in terms of elitism, in terms of racism, in terms of many other aspects. The underlying vision of academic freedom and of collegial governance is one that we should sustain. We just have to do it differently. We have a real advantage in Canada. In Canada, academic staff at universities and colleges have the highest union density of any employee group in the country. In other words, a higher percentage of university and college academics are unionized than any other profession or job in Canada, about 90%, which affords a wonderful opportunity to have an influence on these things. So instead of saying, well, we're just going to leave it to Senate, let's start, and we've been encouraging people in CAUT to do this, let's start trying to use collective bargaining creatively to embed lots of academic matters in the collective agreement where what's agreed to is enforceable. So already in collective agreements, we have academic freedom language, promotion and tenure, complement, intellectual property, and so on, all things that formerly might have been dealt with by senates, where they're agreed to, but they're not enforceable. The only time faculty are truly in a collegial, and collegial, by the way, here does not mean congenial. Collegial comes from collegium, like the College of Cardinals. In other words, where the collegium has, the collectivity has power. The only time we're there as equals is when we're at the bargaining table. So if you look at, these are just some of the things that we already find in most collective agreement. Just with respect to academic freedom, the only protection any academic in this country has for academic freedom is what's written in your collective agreement. There is no protection in the law. Universities can have wonderful policies like the University of Toronto, but when we get into actual cases like Nancy Oliveira, it wasn't worth the paper it was written on because it isn't enforceable. So it's only what's in your collective agreement that provides a real voice for faculty, a protected voice on any of these matters. So we have to look at how we can use collective bargaining more creatively. That in turn requires us to defend labor rights. Labor rights in this country are under a vigorous attack, as you well know. And that high rate of unionization of academics allows us to bargain and build in protections, but only insofar as we can defend labor rights more generally. And insofar as governments are intervening in all sorts of ways, contemplating the end of the Rand formula, contemplating other restrictions on labor rights, that will interfere directly with our ability to promote a vision of the university through collective bargaining that we want. We also need to being unionized is only the first step. We also have to have a vision of unionism that goes off beyond business unionism. You know, our role is not just to get higher wages and better working conditions for our members. We have to engage in all sorts of lobbying and protests and support with other groups around broader social issues because, for example, there is no academic freedom in a society where there aren't basic civil liberties. And so we can't say, well, we're going to negotiate civil liberties, but when issues of broader, I mean, when issues of broader civil liberties come up and other groups are fighting those, when the Harper government is undermining some fundamental rights, we can't say, well, that goes beyond the collective agreement, we can't deal with that. We have to use our academic freedom. One of the ironies, there are no workers in the country that have more protections than we do. And my late friend David Noble, one day when I was bemoaning the number of academic freedom cases we had, I was dealing with about 80 of them at the time. He said, Jim, what's notable is that you have only 80 academic freedom cases out of 68,000 members. Why do you have so few? And he went on to observe, and he was right, most of us by the time we get tenure don't do anything where we need tenure. We don't take advantage of the great right we have, and therefore one of the things we can do in the face of a university that's turning in a very different direction than we like is to use that academic freedom vigorously. We also have to mobilize our colleagues and students around these and other issues, like accessibility, equity. I mean, the list could go on of issues that we as faculty unions need to deal with, and to use the strength we have as a unionized organization to push the limits. We also have to build real alliances with students. You know, Carlo was mentioning the Quebec students. One of the ironies, of course, is during that student strike, an issue came up at CAUT Council about standing in solidarity with the students. Most of our locals in Quebec opposed it. Now, the rest of the locals across the country didn't, and we stood in strong solidarity with them. But there are all sorts of contradictions. And we have to be really clear that we have to stand in solidarity with other groups in the society around progressive changes if we're going to have any changes of use in the university. And we have to find ways to take these issues to the public. That's perhaps the biggest challenge. In CAT, we're increasingly using the media. I don't know if you saw a Fifth Estate program called Silence in the Labs. We worked with CBC Fifth Estate for about a year for that program to talk about what's happening with research and science policy in Canada. And that program reached more Canadians than every publication, every effort CAT could have made using our own internal means. So we have to find creative ways to take issues to the public. What I've learned in my years at CAT is one thing. The only people who are going to raise these issues are academic staff and students. We can't count on the administrations of our institutions to defend the integrity of the institutions. We can't count on anybody else to do it. It's those of us in this room, our students, our colleagues, who will determine our future. And this conference looks like a really good step toward a more progressive future. Thank you very much.